Dynasty trade targets. Let's go ahead and get into it, y'all. We are getting into November. Season's halfway over. Technically, we are at the halfway mark of the 2022 fantasy season. And honestly, I feel like things are winding down a little bit because right now, getting into week 9, you're looking at your teams and judging by the rest of your league, you can get a sense of where you're at, like in your particular league. Looking at your roster, looking at your record, it might be time here in the next couple of weeks to maybe shut things down, maybe look towards 2023. And so to help you out with a couple of the things you might have to do in order to make your roster ready for the next season, let's talk about a couple of dynasty trade targets. Now, these are going to be two, let's say, I don't know, like they got a couple of wide receivers, a little bit of drama around them. But now with my co-host, my partner, Adam Wilde, out on assignment this week, you're just stuck with me. That's who you got. Chris Allen here with Footballguys to talk to you about just a couple of wide receivers from a dynasty perspective that could be a couple of trade targets that you'd want to acquire on the cheap, and cheap is relative. Now, I'm not saying that any manager currently rostering out of these guys are going to be selling them for 2025 thirds or anything like that. But compared to what their draft cost was a year ago, we might be able to get them for something a little bit cheaper, depending on the manager that you're currently working with in order to acquire them. But let's start off with the first one. Elijah Moore, New York Jets. We came into the 2022 season, his sophomore season, with quite a bit of excitement. Right? Whether it was going to be Zach Wilson at some point. Remember back in August, wound up having the lower body injury keeping him out. Joe Flacco comes in and actually starts running a relatively efficient offense. We're seeing Garrett Wilson take off like in his rookie campaign. We're seeing Breece Hall come out. Rest in peace, at least from a fantasy perspective for him. Hopefully we'll see him back in 2023, but not enough for Elijah Moore. Now it's essentially gotten to the point where, what was it, only just 2 to 3 weeks ago, we were hearing trade rumors, discussion about whether or what his involvement is going to be in the offense, essentially to the point where after this past week, he more or less told us he doesn't have any sort of chemistry with quarterback Zach Wilson. His snaps were down to 17%, didn't get a target. Pop on over to Pro Football Focus. It doesn't even register as him running a route last week. My man couldn't even get in some cardio while he's out on the field. So what are we supposed to do with Elijah Moore? Fantasy managers looking at this point, the prices that we paid for him while he was coming out as a rookie bottomed out at this point. Now looking at him getting 0 targets, no involvement in the offense. With even Coach Saleh indicating that they wanted to get more and more work for Garrett Wilson moving forward. So if it's Garrett Wilson, if it's Tyler Conklin, if it's going to be, even with Corey Davis out with an injury, we still couldn't get more work for Elijah Moore. So what are we supposed to think about his involvement in the offense moving forward? Well, again, I'm trying not to project too much moving forward because there's too many, unknowns. There's some uncertainty going into this offense. It starts with the quarterback himself. This is Zach Wilson now in his second season, unable to really deal with pressure, really unable to even operate an efficient offense when he's not under fire, and at least even in the pocket. There's so many things about his mechanics and his fundamentals at this point. A lot of questions surrounding whether or not he should be the starting quarterback for the Jets, but not going to get into that mess. Let's just focus on Elijah Moore. What do we know about Elijah Moore? And of course, if you've followed any of my work here at Footballguys, or at least anywhere within the fantasy football industry, I try and approach things from a quantifiable perspective or an analytical perspective. And so let's look at Elijah Moore's rookie campaign, what he was capable of doing his freshman season. Just pulling up a couple of charts that I was able to throw together for tonight. Looking at his yards per route run, efficiency metric that allows you to look at what they're able to do once they get the ball in their hands, judging by the amount of routes they're actually running. To start off the season, Elijah Moore was really no different than any other rookie wide receiver. From a target perspective, from a volume perspective, it's difficult for rookie wide receivers to immediately pop once they get on the field. We didn't really expect him to be like Jamar Chase or any of the other star wide receivers that have come out, especially given the situation that he was in. Rookie wide receiver, rookie quarterback. And even with Robert Saleh coming over to New York, there were so many unknowns that within that offense, that it was hard for him to get started. But even within the first like 3 to 4 games, we saw him start to pop up. I mean, his yards per route run like started to increase, targets per route run like started to increase to the point where over the back end of the season, even from just a fantasy standpoint, like we could start to look at Elijah Moore as a, let's say, viable mid to low end wide receiver too, with some outbursts like here and there. I mean, you can see towards the back end of the season, like where he actually had, 70, 80 yards and a touchdown, like somewhere along those lines. But I mean, kind of tossing all of the, I guess, fantasy production aside, it's more about like, could he create with the targets he was provided? The answer is yes. I mean, he could do that like with the best of them. I mean, looking at just his numbers like on their own, absolutely. That was exactly what we'd expect to see from any of the analytical studies that have been done like for rookie wide receivers. I mean, if you look at the post-buy bump for most like wide receivers, these have been studies that have been done by most of the other folks like within the fantasy football industry. Our own Jordan McNamara here at Footballguys has conducted a similar study looking at like what you should expect from rookie wide receivers, like given the draft capital, and then how we can at least try to project what their workload is going to be and efficiency is going to be moving forward, just looking at like their target share, air yard share, things of that nature. And so we see for Elijah Moore, I mean, we see the steady inclination like of both these yards per route run and target per route run, all good. Let's compare that to the rest of his rookie class. I mean, I've already brought up Jamar Chase, like my guy, because I'm a Bengals fan. But looking at the rest of the wide receivers, like in Elijah Moore's class, like whether it was Jamar Chase, Devonta Smith, Jalen Waddle, like all three of those prospects had like over like 100 targets. Right? Elijah Moore, 60, 70 targets, like somewhere in there, still able to keep up with the efficiency numbers that at least Devonta Smith being essentially the de facto wide receiver one for Philly, Jalen Waddle, more or less the de facto number one wide receiver for Miami. I mean, whether or not like Devontae Parker was in and out of the lineup, I mean, that was the case like for both of those guys. I mean, getting over 100 targets for both of them. Elijah Moore still keeping up in efficiency. And of course, you've got Amon-Ra St. Brown, and we know what his story was over the back end of the season with those 6 to 7 games, like scoring anywhere from 8 to 12 targets. So it's just volume helped some of the other players like in Elijah Moore's class, but still able to keep up with each of them, like in terms of his yards per route run. So, I mean, it does at least, like from what we know, I mean, what Elijah Moore was capable of doing just last season, it does at least give us some sense of confidence that if he's capable of earning targets, which is a skill in of itself, but he was capable of doing so last year, and he was capable of being efficient, like once he had the ball in his hands. I mean, to the point where he was actually standing with the rest of his classmates in what was a solid wide receiver class. So what's changed? Has Elijah Moore changed? Like, has his skill set declined to the point where he's incapable of running targets, incapable of being efficient, incapable of actually producing the yards and production that would be required to continue to move the offense? I haven't seen that. If anything, it's just more of a change in what is going on, like with the entire team at this point. I mean, you do have the influx, or not influx, but rather the incoming Garrett Wilson, who is more of an alpha wide receiver, which should be more, he is obviously more capable of earning targets. Then, of course, you do have at least the, I guess, not being in sync like with Zach Wilson, which has caused so much consternation to the point where, again, we're seeing this drama kind of being played out in real time in front of us. So why is he a trade target? I mean, what is the actionable portion to this? I mean, we've got a good wide receiver. At least for all intents and purposes, we should still believe that Elijah Moore is a good receiver. I mean, what is the outlook for him moving forward? Still going to be with the Jets? I mean, we've got until, I mean, this podcast will drop probably shortly, before the trade deadline on November 1st. So for all intents and purposes, he should continue to remain part of the New York Jets franchise for the foreseeable future. So we at least have one more season with him being there. So how do things change moving forward? Well, something's got to give. We can't continue to, at least the expectation should not be that he's going to continue to ride the bench at this point. We should see him on the field. We should see him capable of being able to earn targets and get back to the point where he was at. It might not be 6, 7, 8 targets, but but he should still be a part of the offense. Either that, or they're just going to make him inactive for the rest of the season, which is a scenario that I don't think anybody should be counting on at this point, or at least not in my range of outcomes for Elijah Moore. But still, with all the drama that's being played out right now, and his value not being at where it's supposed to be, again, this was for most folks, this is what, end of the first round, early second round, like dynasty pick last year. Is he being valued this way at that point as of right now? No. So, like, given the fact that there is this level of drama being played out, like in the media, uncertainty about his future moving forward, it does at least present an acquisition opportunity for fantasy managers that are looking to make some changes, like to their roster. And so, if you do find yourself like in that particular position, see what you can get for him. At least ask. At least it might be a little fresh. I mean, and of course, the uncertainty would make anybody want to hold at this point. But trying to make at least a reasonable offer, like to a manager that's currently holding him, to the point where you can get a player that you know to be good, a player that you know can create, like once they do have the ball and once they do earn targets, that is where like the value does come, like in acquiring a player such as Elijah Moore. And forget about situation. I mean, the Jets, what we thought of the 2021 Jets, we thought to be a terrible situation. Elijah Moore was capable of succeeding, or at least creating, like in that particular situation. So to say that it could get worse, I mean, I guess they could ship him off to the Panthers or something like that. I guess that could make things worse. But otherwise, I mean, for right now, I mean, where he's at right now should be capable of allowing him to create, like once he does, like sort things out, like with both the coaching staff and also Zach Wilson, but then also allow him to actually be a viable fantasy option, like, or a starting fantasy wide receiver, like for you, like once you get him onto your team. So at least for his purposes, he would be a trade target for right now, like for this season, like somebody that you can go out and at least try and work a deal out to see if you can capture some of that value against, relative to what his cost was like during his rookie campaign. But there's another receiver that I wanted to talk about real quick. And actually his name was just up there, like on the chart that I just pulled up. Here, I'll pull him up again real quick. So out of all the other wide receivers that are currently up there, I mean, Jamar Chase, untouchable. Jalen Waddle, Devonta Smith, probably also untouchable. Amon-Ra, untouchable. Rashad Bateman, you could probably pick him up. Rondale Moore, nobody's really trying to trade for him at this point as well. Kadarius Toney, though. Kadarius Toney finds himself in a different situation, quite literally. He gets traded over to the Kansas City Chiefs. And now I wanted to bring up his trade conditions right now as kind of an idea for how we can like kind of spin this into like a dynasty aspect. Because let's see. So according to Spotrac, traded over to Kansas City Chiefs for a 2023 third conditional compensatory pick and a 2023 sixth round pick. Okay. So a couple of future picks that Kansas City sent over to the Giants in order to acquire Kadarius Toney. Now, let's think about what the Kansas City Chiefs currently have on their roster, or who rather the Kansas City Chiefs currently have on their roster. And again, we can use Spotrac in order to help us out with that. Because let's see, they bring over Juju Smith-Schuster, also acquire Marquez Valdes-Scantling. Of course, like Travis Kelce, Mecole Hardman, so on and so forth. But again, what are who do they have ties to moving forward? And that's really where the dynasty aspect of this kind of comes into play. Because as of right now, Kadarius Toney hasn't been able to suit up for pretty much any of the games, at least be fantasy relevant, like in the game so far, that he has been able to suit up for, to the point where we can trust him and actually feel like we can put him in our starting rosters. But this is more of a play for the long run, because if you look at each of the wide receivers currently on the Chiefs. So let's see, if I pop on over to, let's say, Juju Smith-Schuster, let's see, what is his contract like situation like for Kansas City Chiefs? Just signed through the 2022 season. He will be a free agent in 2023. Let's see, let's flip on over. Let's go ahead and look at, Mecole Hardman. I mean, the guy that just scored how many touchdowns just this past week, or not this past week, but the week beforehand, since they're on bye. Let's see, Mecole Hardman, how many years does he have left with the Kansas City Chiefs before he winds up having to become a free agent? If I'm remembering correctly, he should also be a free agent after this season. Oh, look at that. 2023 UFA. All right. Let's see. What about, they still got Sky Moore, Mecole Hardman. Let's see. Marquez Valdes-Scantling. Let's see if we can make this 3 for 3. Does he wind up having, does he going through? All right, he's going through 2024. $2 million dead cap hit. All right. So out of the wide receivers that they've got on the squad, so let's see, 1, 2, 3. I mean, we can wind up, I mean, we can talk about Sky Moore on a rookie contract, doesn't count. Justin Watson, the same thing. But out of their veteran wide receivers, at least 2 of them are now going to be free agents in 2023. And if we're thinking about like how the Kansas City Chiefs have decided to build their roster in this post Tyreek Hill era, has been through trying to take their swings on this viable, well, at least over the offseason, they were free agents, but either bringing in potential wide receivers like on the cheap. You saw the signing contracts like for both MVS, Juju Smith-Schuster. They picked up Sky Moore like relatively cheap as well. And they're also taking some swings on guys like Justin Watson, like towards the back end. Kadarius Toney, again, looking at his contract, like for at least now switching over to the Kansas City Chiefs. Again, relatively cheap. 1.9 million, 2.5 million to finish out his rookie deal. All right. Again, relatively cheap. This is the way that the Kansas City Chiefs are trying to, again, replenish their wide receiver core while still having one of the best quarterbacks, if not the best quarterback, like in the NFL. I mean, outside of, Josh Allen. But that's the purpose of this. I mean, that's the actionable takeaway, like for Kadarius Toney's outlook. This is not a 2022 move. To be quite honest, I mean, if the Chiefs wind up getting any sort of production out of Kadarius Toney, that's a bonus. But looking at the way that the rest of their roster is currently constructed, only having MVS for, let's see, this year and then next year, Juju Smith-Schuster through this year, Mecole Hardman through this year, at least the Chiefs are giving themselves options, potentially, assuming that the health of Kadarius Toney magically improves between now and the end of the season. At least, again, they still have options like at the wide receiver position, again, within aging Travis Kelce and whatever they want to do for their pass catching options, like out of the backfield. But that's the point. And that's how we should approach it as dynasty managers. If you are sitting at towards the, let's say, middle of the pack, but you want to make a push for this year, Kadarius Toney might not be the option for you. Because again, it's difficult to expect anything, any high-end production out of him in 2022, unless he does that, that wrestling meme with Kevin Nash, like where he rips off the serape off his leg and he's like completely fine or whatever. Unless that happens, then no, we shouldn't expect anything. He's now part of a 4-man committee at wide receiver. And then of course you still have Travis Kelce, who is essentially a wide receiver that happens to have a TE designation like next to his name. But then that's the problem, like with trying to roster any of the Kansas City Chiefs outside of one Travis Kelce, and you're throwing a dart at the other wide receivers. But that's for this year. But if you invest in him for next year, so if you want to try and toss in like a 2023, 2020 or 2024 pick or something like later on down the line in order to acquire him for next year, then that becomes a bit more viable option for you. So again, depends on where you're at, like in your league, depends on what your roster is currently sitting at. And so for any of the managers that are out there that at least are already looking at their roster, they've had injuries, like you're banking on Trey Lance to make that leap this year, or you're looking at, again, maybe if you have Elijah Moore like on your roster, and you're hoping for him to make that leap. Rashad Bateman, that's definitely me for sure in a couple of leagues where, again, your wide receivers are looking kind of weak. You can use some punch like in the out years past this year, and you're looking for some help. Again, Elijah Moore, Kadarius Toney, 2 possible, again, lower value targets at this point in the 2022 campaign that could be possible targets for you in order to improve your dynasty outlook. Not for this year. Elijah Moore, yes. Kadarius Toney, no. But either way, if you're looking to improve your dynasty roster, there's at least 2 trade targets right here for you that you could possibly pick up in order to help you out over this season and then also next season. All right, so that's it for me. Dynasty Newsletter. Y'all know where to find us. Me, Chris Allen, FFWX. Adam and I will be back next week to dish out some more information. But until then, take care of yourself, and we'll catch y'all next week. Peace.